Hello YouTube. It's been a while since I made a video. I don't tend to make videos often anymore because, quite frankly, the YouTube format doesn't really fit the regular user. It's more along the lines of like a Netflix, which, you know, makes it kind of hard to find videos that are of interest. At least I'm having a hard time finding videos of interest. But anyways, so I wanted to make this particular video because, for one thing, I haven't made a video in a while, and another thing would be along the lines of, well, views change over time. Particularly, my views change over time. So I was watching this video from I Like Newman, and it was entitled "Liberal Douchebaggery," and what I think that's what it was called, douchebaggery or something like that. And what he was talking about in that particular video was this tendency you see within certain political movements, and in that case, the liberal movement, of framing criticisms as though they belong to a certain camp. And I know I caught myself doing that quite often in the past, evidently, throughout my older videos. It doesn't surprise me that I was a liberal at the time, but anyways. So if you hear someone talking about, you know, that they oppose taxes or that they oppose regulations, then you assume, well, that's a conservative, or that's a capitalist, or that's a corporatist, or, you know, there are different words that you can use. But usually it's along the lines of a conservatard is the word used, as I Like Newman was pointing out in his particular video. And I found that this is often the case, but it's not just the case with liberals, it's the case with all kinds of political movements. I mean, if I'm amongst a group of, say, libertarians, and someone says something along the lines of, you know, well, you know, in order to further technology and study space, we may want some sort of like NASA-like entity, and everyone will scream and say, you're a statist, and that sort of thing. If, you know, it remains some sort of like state or not. It's just like one institution that everyone would chip in on, right? So I guess it's still kind of like a state, you know? So an anarchist or a libertarian would say, oh, you're such a statist. So we tend to attribute certain qualities or certain positions that people take with other groups, and we group them within that group. But I guess it's a little different when it comes to anarchism and statism because, well, the differences are pretty polarizing. One believes that you can institute and manage a particular idea, and that it can work and it can function, and it does for a short amount of time. When you look at it over time, it corrupts beyond all belief. The costs of the particular program and institution grow exponentially, and what the output of that institution degrades in terms of quality over time. Perfect example would be the Canadian healthcare system. I'm not sure about the British healthcare system, but I have heard some issues with the NHS having some issues right now, particularly with funding, much like in most other Western nations. So there is this tendency of corruption eating away at a good idea, and it even working to such an extent that it turns that good idea and kind of gives it a negative light, and that this negativity is not attributed to the means to bring that idea to fruition, but rather to the idea itself. So it's sort of along the lines of universal health care is wrong because the means that we utilize to implement it were wrong, but instead of saying that, they'll just say it didn't work, so universal health care doesn't work. But when you say what didn't work, it didn't work in Canada, or it didn't work somewhere else, say. But it's one example of it not working in and therefore the entire idea is wrong, instead of revisiting, of course, how that idea was formulated, right? Now, a problem you fall in when you do that as well is, again, to break that apart again, is that how you form it is a particular pattern, and that pattern has a central core, and that central core has to be the means of implementation, has to be sort of like the agreement amongst all parties. How does that agreement form? So the very basis of any idea or of any institution is, how does it form? Meaning, is it going to be something where we're all going to have a vote or say in, or is it going to be something that's going to be more of a Republican thing, along the lines of, we're going, the certain professionals or really smart people or whatever that we're going to choose are going to make those intelligent decisions for us, even if we don't want, say, don't want to partake into something. If it's decided for us that we are to partake in it because we've given this person our consent to make decisions for us, then we're stuck with whatever the end deal is. So there is this tendency, not only along the lines of people grouping ideas with other groups, but also of ignoring the means of implementation for particular ideas. I've noticed this also in the education system. And by this I mean, of course, I'm going to sound like an old guy talking about when I went to school, but here it goes. When I went to school, you had to learn not just the answer to a question, but what was also important was how you got there. So the work you did in order to get to the answer to the question. So if it was a math quiz, you couldn't just use a calculator and come up with the answer and just write the answer. You had to write down the entire work you did in order to get to the answer, and you also graded on that work. So you understood the means to an end, not just the ends. And you didn't just focus on the ends, which is kind of what the U.S. education system does with this whole... I even forget the name now because I really don't give a fuck about actual politics. But, that thing that Bush and Obama do, this federal thing with regards to education, who cares, where it's all rated on test scores. Is it Race to the Top, or is that an old one? They do a lot of them. They've done them since the Department of Education. That's another thing also that I like, that also irks me. There's this notion amongst liberals that if, again, it goes further with this, but this is a prime example here. If you want to, if you don't believe the Department of Education was a good idea, say as an American, I'm not an American, but anyways, and you want to dismantle the Department of Education, then they're going to say that you hate education and that somehow you're in league with, like, homeschoolers. But even then, homeschoolers, they're not talking about all kinds of homeschoolers. They're not talking about, in their mind, I guess this doesn't exist, about really intelligent parents teaching their children instead of a really shitty public education system. But no, instead of that, when they think homeschoolers, they think like Christian homeschoolers, like fundamentals. It's not even just Christian homeschoolers. It's always the worst. So whenever it's an idea that goes against their ideology, doing something different than their ideology, they kind of blow up the worst possible opposition to that idea as being the opposition to that idea. So homeschoolers become fundamentalist Christians wanting to indoctrinate their children, even though they could be liberal academics not wanting their children to go to shitty public school and not learn anything, really. Because, let's face it, if you're only learning the answers and you're not learning the means to that answer, then your whole life you're not going to understand the differences between different means to getting to an end. In other words, there are many more means than just one. Quite often. There are many ways of getting to an answer, or to solving a problem. But if you only know the answer to the problem, then how are you going to figure out how you can tackle or change or tweak the means in order to solve that problem? You know what I'm saying? So to me, it's sort of it plays along also in politics, because I'm not saying this is something that's done on purpose. I'm just saying it just ends up being a coincidence, I guess, in that if you have an entire generation brought up on only knowing the answer to a question and never really thinking about the way to get to that answer, then when it comes to the time when they're voting, then how are they going to know which plan is the best plan? You know what I'm saying? So you have various candidates who are going to offer various plans, various ideas. How are they going to know which one has the potential of working and which one doesn't, if they can't deconstruct an idea and understand the logical as well as emotional processes that are behind that particular idea? And I see this more and more and more, and I guess it's because it doesn't really matter anymore, because politics has turned into this partisan thing where people choose one side or the other. So if you're not with us, you're against us. And that's kind of what this all plays into. It's odd that during the Bush years, a lot of my liberal friends, see, I was sincere and I was honest when I said that I had a problem with this, you're either with us or against us. It wasn't a political ploy, it wasn't a partisan ploy. I was being honest. I didn't think that when I was making these arguments, a lot of the people who were thumbing me up were imbeciles. Well, not imbeciles, I'm sorry. No, you can't say they're imbeciles, but I'm saying they're disingenuous, they're partisan. So it wasn't that they agreed with the idea, per se. It was more along the lines of, it's an idea that our side supports. You know what I'm saying? Or this is a good argument against the other side. So as long as it's a good argument against the other side, they felt that a person like me, who was presenting himself as a libertarian socialist, they thought that though I was making strong arguments against conservatards, that somehow a friend of a friend, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So it was sort of along the lines of, while we're not in power right now, you're my friend. And I guess that's part of the liberal psyche. Not all liberals, evidently, but of the mainstream political liberals. In that, in times when they're down, they will ally themselves with a bunch of various groups, and then when they get into power, it's sort of like they just, backhand all those people. You know what I'm saying? And it's not just the liberals who did this. The Bolsheviks did this in the USSR. I mean, their revolution was also in conjunction with simultaneous revolutions by anarchists and by various other groups, liberal Democrats, etc. But once the Bolsheviks were able to defeat the Tsar and the conservatards in Russian society, or Soviet society, I guess, they then, well, I guess it would be Russian society back then, but they then moved towards this position of, gulags for all of you, fuck you, and that's what happened. They were all killed. Anyone who wasn't their friend or didn't see things their way. So any sort of counter-revolutionary or simultaneous revolutionary movements, it was like, no, because we're statists, one order, implement one order, this is the way it'll be, fuck you. And this is a process that you see continuing throughout history. And I just watched Oliver Stone's The Untold Story of the United States of America, and it tells, he says through progressive lens, but I think it really tells the American story not so much through a progressive lens, but through a libertarian progressive lens, a libertarian socialist lens. Because as Alec Newman was saying, he would prefer living in the liberal USA than he would in the conservatard USA. Libertarian socialists, I'm quite certain, would prefer living under a Roosevelt, FDR USA, than they would, say, a Ronald Reagan USA. So there is this this thing that happens whenever certain parties, and I guess it's the same maybe even for conservatives, because they ally themselves with libertarians, and then when they get into power, it's sort of like, fuck you libertarians, we're all neocons now, sort of thing, you know? Even though Bush ran on a humble foreign policy. But point being is it's something that repeats, and you see it over and over and over. And I guess that's the main failure of looking at the world through a lens of requiring some sort of central hub, a central place where, for all the decision making. When you view the world that way, that you need some sort of authoritative figure, like a parent, either a mother or a father figure, to pretty much control things and make sure everything goes right. When you have that, then I guess there's only one method by which you can implement it, right? So you can't have simultaneous, like you can't have a state protecting simultaneous liberties, because in doing so, the state, if it protected them all, would have to interfere, would be interfering in one way, shape, or another. And from my point of view, what changed a lot of my views was just that. It was noticing what happened to Democrats after Obama was elected, and seeing the similarities to liberals, for the most part, in the USA, and seeing the similarities through the anti-war era with Richard Nixon. See, when Johnson decided not to run for re-election, he kind of, I guess in a way, left a void, especially on the Democrat side. And a lot of the liberals and Democrats who believed in FDR's dream, I guess you could say, of a big state protector, I guess they were sort of disillusioned. So during the years that Nixon was in, liberals joined big time in the anti-war movement. And actually they helped make or shape the anti-war movement and turn it into a popular movement. So I guess that's sort of what liberals do, in a sense, is, because as soon as Carter came in, it was like, fuck you to everyone else, and it was back to the old, really shitty foreign policy under Zbigniew, I forget his name, and it really doesn't matter. Actually, I'm purposely forgetting all this stuff because it doesn't matter. It's Brzezinski, in case you're wondering. But anyways, I think it's his daughter now works for MSNBC. So it turned into this whole thing of let's prop up the Shah and let's do all this, these backroom deals. Let's do the CIA. Let's do all this really shitty stuff. When this was all stuff that the anti-war movement in those days was opposing, and the election of Carter was supposed to change that. Like the election of Obama. So, what I noticed through all of this is that it's not so much liberal douchebaggery or conservatar douchebaggery or whatnot. It's just a failure of our means of, or our method of organization. We're trying to get to an answer, but the way that we've decided to shape ourselves, the work that we're doing in between the question and the answer, in that we're sticking to one format, and that format is creating what a lot of liberals, particularly in the media, seem aloof about, which is these divisions. They're wondering why America's so divided, and there's all hours of programming on MSNBC or even on CNN talking about divided America and talking about a Black America or a Hispanic America and all that kind of stuff, right? And it's sort of like, why? Why are we all divided? Why can't we all get behind stuff? Why do Republicans? Why are they always obstructionists? And that's sort of what would I call that? I guess it's the bullshit argument used because it's a fantasy. It's not actually what's happening. But anyways, it's the popular bandwagon thing that partisans jump on right now, particularly if you're a Democratic partisan. So my take is that in that equation, what we're not really looking at or really focusing at is the work that needs to be done in the middle. The means to that end. So I think that unfortunately, what we've decided to be the answer is what is creating these particular divisions, because a singular central authority cannot be everything to everyone, particularly not a diverse species that is, well, let's face it, it's a fact that is made up of individuals. And each individual having slightly different, or even vastly different, but never the same, exact same views on everything. So, I understand that people like to say, well, it's unrealistic to think that, there's ever going to be any other way of shaping society, and, that's your opinion, and that's fine, But with regards to what Alec Newman was saying in his video, I just wanted to add to that to really showcase this the validity of what he was saying, but how it applies also to any form of person who wishes to enforce a particular ideal upon everyone. So that wishes to create a different type of conformity for everyone to conform to. It's sort of like, well, this is the best conformity because this conformity has gay rights, and it has women's rights, and it has civil rights, and it has there's like rainbows pissing out of people's arseholes. That's the type of conformity that I want to sell you. And then on the other end, it's sort of like, well, the type of conformity that we want to sell you is this idea of free markets. But it's not really free markets. Let's face it, Republicans use the word but don't know what the hell it means. And it's enterprise, free enterprise, and low taxation. We want you to conform to this, small government and all that. And it's sort of like it's this battle. They say it's a battle of cultures, but really it's a battle of trying to impose a culture upon people that reject it. And it's literally a battle at the foundation of what the United States of America claims it is, which is a melting pot, which is bullshit. Not saying USA isn't or doesn't claim to be a melting pot, and doesn't try really hard to be a melting pot. I'm saying melting pots are bullshit. Trying to make people conform, people of various backgrounds, you could say ethnic backgrounds, or you could say various backgrounds when it even comes to simply their upbringing. It's a vast it's a vast landmass, the United States of America, right? So you've got various ways of life, various cultural values in the United States of America itself, and then you add cultures that are coming into the United States of America and making a home within the United States of America to that list, and you try to create a melting pot. And the problem then is when that power balance in that melting pot shifts. And when that power balance in that melting pot shifts to another segment of the population, say, then the old segment of the population decries that they are now being oppressed, which is this whole thing that you see with predominantly Caucasian Americans talking about how white people are the new black or something like that. Sorry, I can't help but laugh when I say that stuff. But anyway, so that's part of that. It's part of that conformity, losing the power to compel or force your view upon the entire population, and now it's shifting to a different segment of a segment of the population. And progressives are sort of in there, and they think somewhat the utopian ideal, and by progressives I mean sort of like your libertarian, almost libertarian. Some of them are social democrats, some of them are democratic socialists. It's not the same thing. But they have this like utopian view that one day or somehow they'll make a really good argument, or they'll elect a really good leader, and that person will be able to sell their idea to everyone, and they'll be able to force or conform to that idea without understanding that they're an extreme minority. And even when those powers came into power, say under FDR, they didn't do what they said they would do. Because power corrupts absolutely. When you're trying to say, I'm a good guy, and then you're like, fuck, I'm powerful, then usually you said you were a good guy because you were weak to begin with. Usually, not always the case. Meaning, it's sort of like, I believe in peace, but it's because, you don't want to get killed. There's a lot of that. Trust me. And when these type of characters, not everyone's that way. Some people are, actually believe in these, because they're idealists. They believe in ideals. But some people, it's along the lines of just believe in it, then they get power, and they're like, fuck yeah, party. Like Obama is a prime example of that. A bullshitter. George W. Bush, too. I believe in a humble foreign policy, no nation building, and that was his big answer, and Al Gore's just looking at him like, oh shit, I'm going to lose this election after he said that. And evidently, Al Gore did, through scrupulous means, lose the election. The whole point, again, falls onto this whole thing of bullshit. So all this just to say, and just to point out, that within such a diverse population, and when you create some sort of centralized form of government, see, I would even be happy with moves to decentralize government and empower communities. That would make me happy. I would move to that country as opposed to the LUSA, personally. But if you did that in your own community, highly likely people with like-minded views would move closer together. And this kind of goes with what a lot of other people have said. And I know you're like, that sounds like a confederacy. You must be a racist. You must be part of, must be a slave owner. You must work on a plantation or want to own a plantation. I'm even trying to do the accent here. No. I'm just saying that when you have a more direct approach to power is less corrupt. Okay? Because let's face it, at a community level, here in the community in which I live here, if the municipal guy, is being a dick, well, he's right here. You know what I'm saying? And even then, my family makes up this community, right? So that's a large voting block, and those are really good allies should anything happen to me that's wrong. You know what I'm saying? As opposed to if it's a state, well, my family's pretty small compared to 36 million Canadians, but if it's happening in my community here, and so my family is like, I don't know, about 50 people, and the community's only about, 500 people, then it's sort of like, well, we've got a lot of pull. So you have at least more pull in attempting to live your life the way that you see fit. It's not perfect, but it'd be an improvement. But the big problem that I see with liberals, conservatives, and the rest of the statists is they don't see that as being a means to an end. A different way, again, than, say, an anarchist way that I would talk about normally. of doing things. No, to them it's just dictated from some sort of pulpit, and you're going to conform. And our new popular culture is all about incessant stupidity, music without lyrics, and playing with your genitals, which seems to be what I'm getting from popular culture these days. It's something about pussy being hot, and then the other guy says, I'm a play with that pussy, I'm a make it pop. And then I'm literally not reading this. This is just coming out based on shit that I've heard from popular culture. And a Star Trek where it's just explosion after explosion after explosion, and then someone says a one-liner from an old Star Trek movie, which gets the geeks going, oh, nostalgia, I remember this really great movie. And the action people, well, they're just, going, duh. And a lot of them are liberals. But they wear a fedora hat, so I guess they're intelligent. But anyways, that's all I wanted to say. Peace.